Hey guys, my neighbor asked me to weld his wheelbarrow for him. So I thought, what the heck, I may as well videotape it. Now the problem is this particular bar right here, which tends to fall out on him. And as a consequence, it's very unstable, rickety old wheelbarrow. And you look at this kind of problem and you say, how can we deal with that? You could use a bolt or a screw. But the simplest, the easiest way of dealing with this is just to weld it. And so he's asked me to do that for him. There are three different ways one could weld this. Probably the simplest and easiest way of dealing with this would be stick welding. You put in 332 6011 rod, clean it off, and weld it on the outside on both sides. And that would be the easiest way of dealing with it, but I don't have a stick welder at hand today. The second option would be to use a gas welder, oxyacetylene. That's a great option if you don't have access to 220 volt electricity. It's an aesthetically pleasing technique. It would work well. It would take a little longer. We could do that if we wanted, but what we're going to do today is we're going to weld this with a MIG welder, and not for any other reason, but that's the machine I happen to have on hand today. Okay, so the first part is pretty straightforward. We've got this part that we can take off, and so we can easily clean this up on our bench grinder. I put on my safety glasses, and we'll get started here. All right, now my next task is to use a grinder, and so I'm going to put this device on my hand grinder. Here's the welder we're going to use today. This is a Lincoln 180. You could buy a smaller welder that runs on 110 voltage. Those things are good for thin sheet metal, but they're not so great on the power thing. They're good because you can plug them into any wall socket. This one is a 220 volt machine. It's a little more power, maybe a little less on the light end. You need 220 volt to run it. These machines typically have an on-off switch, a heat device, and a wire feeder speed. And so I've got it turned down fairly low because we're working on fairly thin sheet metal, and of course the wire feed speed is pretty low as well. So you turn the machine on. The device has a wire feeder that forces the wire out like so. I'm using 035 wire, 0.035 inches in diameter, and I'm using 25% CO2, 75% argon. So you always keep it tightened up when not in use, and when you want to use it, you loosen it off and you keep the dial here to about 20 to 30 cubic feet per hour in terms of gas utilization rate. This welder will run aluminum welding as well, but you need to change this gas out to 100% argon, which is only useful for welding aluminum because you need the CO2 to keep things cooler with regular metal. You can't use 100% argon on regular metal. All right, now my next step is to tack this into place. You need to tack it on both sides. Make sure it doesn't twist. Okay, you can see it leaves a pretty good result overall. With MIG welding, there's a much more gentle learning curve, and for beginner welders, it's actually easier to MIG weld than it is with stick welding or some of the other techniques. Maybe not quite as versatile. MIG welding is better for thinner sheet metal. Very little cleanup to be done after it's done. Usually leaves a pretty good result. Okay, you've just done a DIY welding job at home using a MIG welder. Now, I want to point out that this isn't necessarily the best way of doing things. And in fact, if you're going to buy a welder as a first effort, then probably the first welder one should buy is not so much a welder, but a cutting torch. A cutting torch is more versatile. It can be used for more things, heating belt bolts and loosening off bolts. It can be used as a cutting torch. And of course, as a welder, oxyacetylene welding is slower, but fundamentally the principles are very similar, and you can weld a large diversity of metals. You can do brazing. And so if you're thinking about getting a welder for the first time, think about getting a gas oxyacetylene torch as a first effort. Thanks for watching.